Welcome to Washington Talk. I'm Soo Kim. In the United States, both Republicans and Democrats wrapped up their national conventions, nominating their presidential candidates. President Donald Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden accepted their nominations from their respective parties. The two parties also passed party platforms, which included their own policies on North Korea. Today, we'll discuss where the two presidential candidates stand on North Korean issues. Joining us is Soo Kim, policy analyst at the RAND Corporation and adjunct instructor at American University. She served as an analyst in the Central Intelligence Agency and also worked at the Department of Homeland Security. Scot Snyder also joins us today. He's a senior fellow for Korea Studies and director of the program on U.S.-Korea policy at the Council on Foreign Relations. His book, South Korea at the Crossroads, examines the trajectory of South Korean foreign policy. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Young.
Let's first talk about the current administration's approach towards North Korea. During the Republican National Convention, President Donald Trump accepted his party's nomination for the second-term president, stressing once again his America First strategy. While he didn't talk about North Korea at his speech, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo earlier said President Trump kept North Korea from staging additional nuclear and long-range missile tests. I would like to know how you view this. Ms. Kim, let me start with you.
Sure. So, I think it depends on which side of the argument and the time, constraints that you're looking at. But one could argue that we have stopped temporarily North Korea's nuclear missile testing. But if you think about the way U.S.-North Korea relations were advancing in the lead up to the summitry, we almost reached a point of quote unquote fire and fury where there were tensions between the two countries. And only the pressure of sanctions is probably the likely factor that stopped North Korea from pushing us over to the edge. At the same time, we're also seeing that North Korea, even up in the past couple of years, have actually been quietly, of course, testing and advancing and developing their nuclear missile system. So I think it's arguable, but I think also that depending on which side of the argument spectrum you're sitting in, one could argue either way.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Snyder, what's your view?
Well, I think that it shows that there is a big gap between the policy bar for success with North Korea and the political bar for success with North Korea. And what Secretary Pompeo did was to tell us the political bar, the achievement of stopping missile and nuclear testing over the course of the past 3 years. But the administration's self-stated goal from earlier in the process has continuously been final, fully verified dismantlement or comprehensive, verified, irreversible dismantlement.
But isn't it true that North Korea indeed stopped testing nuclear and ICBM tests? Couldn't we say there was some upside to President Trump's approach, Mr. Snyder?
Well, I think there is an upside, but the problem here is that the upside achievements are actually relying on Kim Jong-un's self-restraint and on a personal relationship between Trump and Kim that is changeable and could change. And in fact, Kim Jong-un earlier this year has already indicated that he doesn't feel bound by the expressions of self-restraint that he had made earlier following his meetings with President Trump.
Ms. Kim, what about you? Do you see any upside?
I agree with Scott in that basically the game of chess or strategy that we're playing with North Korea, it seems to wholly depend on Kim Jong-un's self-restraint. In the past few months, we've seen that there's been questions about the North Korean leadership situation where we don't know what is actually going on with Kim Jong-un and the power transition or transfer between Kim Jong-un and his sister. That leaves a lot of uncertainties in terms of how the United States and the other countries in the region are going to respond to North Korean action. So we see Kim Jong-un, of course, but we don't know exactly what is going on with the situation there. There's still a lot of uncertainties and the way and the mobility of Washington and Seoul and Tokyo's responses to North Korea.
Meanwhile, former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, said President Trump rejected the U.S. weakness towards North Korea, and the U.S. passed the toughest sanctions on North Korea in history. What is your assessment on this part, Ms. Kim?
So I think that the question of sanctions, it comes up a lot in the North Korean debate because there's questions about the efficacy and also the way they're enforced. I would say that looking at the North Korea problem and how the United States approached it under this current administration, if you choose only to highlight the positive aspects, we could argue and say that there's been no testing, that there's been relatively, quote unquote, little tension between the two countries. But think of the way that North Korea has been evading sanctions. There's still been illegal ship-to-ship transfers with North Korea, with China, Russian complicit actors. So to say that we've really shut down the North Korean threat and that there's been, quote unquote, measurable progress, I think that's debatable.
Well, what Nikki Haley was really talking about is what happened in 2017 with the application of maximum pressure. And I think that that actually builds on a foundation of some things that occurred in the last year of the Obama administration. I think that it's necessary to note that. But also, I think that it reveals that there was a kind of missed opportunity in that the objective is to marry the pressure of sanctions with diplomatic negotiations. And here is where things kind of went off the rails because President Trump's summit diplomacy actually generated an unintended consequence of relieving pressure on China to enforce sanctions. And so as a result, I think that what Nikki Haley was talking about was a good start, but we didn't really yield the fruit of the benefits from that policy of maximum pressure.
Let's move on to the Democratic presidential candidate, Joe Biden. First of all, the Democratic Party said in its 2020 party platform that it'll constrain and contain the threat posed by North Korea's nuclear program, together with allies and through diplomacy. Former Vice President Biden's campaign criticized in the past President Trump for exchanging so-called love letters with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Is it expected to take an approach quite different from top-down diplomacy? Ms. Kim.
One would expect so, but again, I think what we're doing right now is we're speculating based on what we've heard through press statements and the previous positions of the Obama administration and then Vice President Joe Biden's position on the issue. But at best, I think we could say that there will not be summits between the United States and North Korea. We can also see or expect perhaps more application of sanctions. I would also stress that we might also see perhaps a little bit of recalibration of the United States to emphasize the importance of alliances when it comes to not just dealing with the North Korean threat, but just the problems that we see within the region. That's South Korea, Japan tensions, the role of China in this whole geopolitical debate as well. So I would think that this would be much more principles-based as opposed to relying on, I guess, the decision factors of one leader in the country.
Mm-hmm. And Mr. Snyder?
Yeah, I think the critical point that I'd like to make here is that a Biden administration wants to improve its relationship with South Korea. And South Korea is being led by a progressive administration. And the combination of a progressive administration and a Democratic administration is actually a combination that we haven't seen since Kim Dae-jung and Bill Clinton in the year 2000. And actually, that's a configuration that the North Koreans should like, but I don't think that it's a configuration that can necessarily deliver political progress easily because of the fact that the conservative presence in the process would not be able to make its views felt. And so I think that raises a very complicated issue because if Biden decides not to pursue symmetry with North Korea, then I think that Kim Jong-un is going to have to look back and think about his missed opportunity and failure to get a more permanent footing for a positive U.S.-North Korea relationship during the moment of opportunity with President Trump.
Some pundits expect that former Vice President Biden's North Korean policy will likely be another form of the strategic patience, which was adopted by the Obama administration. critics claim that the strategic patience policy did little to seize North Korea's military provocations. What is your take on this, Mr. Snyder?
Well, I actually think that there's probably no going back to strategic patience because of the magnitude of the North Korean threat. And so in some ways, I think that a new Biden administration would face a similar challenge to the one that the Obama administration initially faced, in which North Korea presented President Obama with both a long-range missile test and a nuclear test, and really set the stage for removing the prospect for diplomacy. And so I think the really big challenge for the Biden administration based on the platform is that they want working level diplomacy with North Korea, and yet that is something that has not been achievable with Kim Jong-un.
They're much more capable with their nuclear weapons and their missiles. And through the whole symmetry, Kim Jong-un and by extension, North Korea has been able to sort of elevate and burnish their image as a country that's maybe not so normal, but we've come to accept and tolerate North Korea the way it is right now. So when we look at not just the buildup of the nuclear missile capabilities, but also just the egregious violations of human rights in North Korea, how is the United States, and in conjunction with South Korea and Japan and other regional actors that are of the same side, how are they going to manage to deal, not just to tolerate, but to actually visibly and verifiably reduce the North Korean threat from all angles? I think that's the bigger question that we have to answer.
Let me ask both of you a blunt question. Which approach will be right? I mean, which approach will eventually succeed in persuading North Korea to give up its nuclear arsenal? Ms. Kim first.
It's not really about choosing either or, but really thinking about the right combination of pressure and incentives and engagement. Perhaps the pressure was not applied at the right points. Perhaps it wasn't really coordinated with the allies in the right way.
Well, I don't think that I can choose which is better because both approaches rely on persuasion. And the problem that we have is that North Korea has set itself on a strategic course to try to become a recognized nuclear state. And so, as Ms. Kim suggested, it really means that persuasion has to be combined with an element of coercion in order to be able to achieve success. And thus far, it appears that coercion combined with persuasion also is not guaranteed to work.
President Trump said he will try to negotiate with Chairman Kim Jong-un if he gets reelected. Does this mean he will hold another summit with Kim Jong-un? And what about Biden? Will he hold a summit with Kim Jong-un? Mr. Snyder.
I think President Trump is dreaming about another summit with Kim Jong-un as the new president. The question is whether it is really possible to make a deal that benefits both countries. And I actually think that a President Biden, the focus is on actually achieving something at the working level.
Mm-hmm. Ms. Kim, will Biden try to meet Kim Jong-un one-to-one?
I would think that based on the lessons that we've learned, as Scott pointed out, that without proper preparation, without really understanding where the opponent is coming from, to hold a top-level meeting where stakes are extremely high, not just in terms of personal leadership legacy, but also in terms of national interests, that, to leave the door option to symmetry, I think that might be a temptation on any human, tendencies. But I think that the lessons that we've learned and that the costs that came along with it, I hope that would serve as some sort of a guidepost.
There's skepticism that North Korea will never give up their nuclear arsenal, no matter who comes to the White House. Is there really no way?
So with the whole denuclearization versus, step by step or just accepting North Korea as it is, when we think about denuclearization, it's tied to the survival of the North Korean regime. And of course, from North Korea's optics, that is a grave concern. But I think also from the interests of our policymakers and even our military leaders is that what happens once we do get North Korea to denuclearize? Is it just going to be a peaceful one, or is it something that's going to be much more conflict-ridden? And there are additional steps that you need to think about.
I think the challenge is that historically, no nation has given up nuclear capability in the absence of a change in leadership. And of course, that is precisely what North Korea most fears. And unfortunately, it may be the only way to imagine that North Korea's denuclearization would actually be possible.
The U.S. presidential election is a little more than 2 months away. It is an important event, not only for the U.S. voters, but also for the world, as the President of the United States has a huge influence on how the world responds to the international affairs, including the one on the Korean Peninsula. And the countdown has begun. Ms. Kim and Mr. Snyder, thank you both very much. I appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
And that does it for this week's Washington Talk from Voice of America. Please join us again next week for more analysis.